How far along is your network segmentation project? Do you have threshold alerts to show that the size of DNS requests or responses were typically of a certain size, but that they are now larger or that there are more of them? Does your current alerting include rules to identify tunneling inside of another protocol? Welcome to Nest Radio News Review, Episode 1. So what do I do now?
I want to do things a little differently in this podcast. Often, InfoSec reporting emphasizes who is behind a cybersecurity incident, naming a group or country. I want to rather focus on the so what. What does this mean for me? And what can I do about it? What is the impact of this story to me, the listener? And what kind of audience is this story really meant for? Is it meant for an individual reader or for employees in an organization with centrally managed systems? Or is it meant for security teams? Or is the intended audience executive readers? Or is it for government and policy staff? In this first episode, I will run through 2 stories from the last couple of weeks. For each story, I will apply a relevancy score to determine which audience it is most relevant to, and then answer the question, so what can I do about this? The first story comes from Nisos, a company focused on human risk intelligence, and is about insider threats. It talks about how insider threats have become a concern for businesses, as they can involve employees, contractors, or others with access to sensitive information, misusing their position. Insider threats can be accidental or deliberate, and in both cases, the damage can have real-world impact. A study by PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, showed that almost 60% of fraud cases involve insiders or a mix of insiders and outsiders, showing that security risks come not only from external hackers, but from people already inside the organization. Nisos noticed a rise in insider threat activity since 2019, with company insiders being recruited on various platforms, from social media sites to encrypted messaging apps and even dark web forums. Nisos describes how these platforms act as digital marketplaces. People who want to harm companies can go there to find insiders willing to sell information or to perform illegal tasks. One common tactic is to use messaging apps like Telegram to openly recruit insiders. Some ads on these platforms target specific companies like Amazon, offering large payouts for access to internal systems. Others focus on industries like telecommunications, promising financial rewards for insider cooperation. Another disturbing activity involves fraudulent refunds. Insiders at retail or e-commerce companies offer to process fake refunds for money. These insiders post details about their services, how much they charge, and what they can do. Now, to the question, who is the audience for this article? If we look at this article through the lens of relevancy or factors that determine relevance, then we can plot these on a 5x5 matrix, which on the x-axis has the reader types: individual reader, employees in an organization with centrally managed systems, security teams, executives, and government and policy staff. And on the y-axis has the factors that determine relevance, like applicability to the audience, actionability, or clear message takeaway, impact and severity, compliance or regulatory dimension, and contextual insight. After scoring, we can see that this story is most applicable to Chief Information Security Officers or CISOs, but that is also relevant to IT security teams. So what do you do? Well, if you're a CISO, it can be helpful to approach the insider threat challenge from different angles. Let's call them detection, prevention, and deterrence. First, if you assess that you are at risk of having a potential insider threat problem, perhaps because of the industry sector you are in, or because of a series of unrelated alerts that your security team has reported on, but which your experience tells you merits further investigation, then the most immediate next step could be to find the wound and try to stop the bleeding, meaning detection, followed closely by response. Do you have the tools in place to detect anomalous movements of data, unusual login patterns, tampering with security tools, or the unauthorized use of removable media, and then the ability to act on those alerts? There are some good products that can help, By using behavioral analytics, monitoring peripherals, and file activity analysis, and identifying deviations from individual baselines. Exabeam has a good offering in this space, and so do other vendors. These products typically require fine-tuning. Otherwise, they run the risk of generating a high rate of false positive alerts. And you know that incorrectly identifying someone's activity as malicious can have a detrimental effect on employee morale. Moving past immediate measures, what controls do you presently have in place, or can you put in place, to deter a would-be insider threat? For example, by making the consequences of this type of action too costly and communicating this cost to employees. Are your employees familiar with your organization's guidelines? Do they have a framework within which they can be productive, feel safe, and thrive? If you're a member of a security team, you can look at this story from the perspective of your current capability and tooling and contrast it with a future target state. Does your current tooling provide you with the ability to detect and block some level of insider threat? If someone in your organization was selling access to the internal network, would your current tooling be able to detect it? Are you presently able to monitor for and alert on anomalous or simultaneous logins from unexpected IP addresses? If someone was abusing an internal system, for example, a billing or payroll system, would your current alerting and detection capability catch it? So, now, looking ahead, if you have identified gaps in your capability or tooling, you can write a brief analysis, include approximate pricing, add some more examples of insider threats, and present both the problem and the solution to your CISO. Be sure to include in your analysis whether your current team would be able to absorb the additional workload or if you would need additional staff, so that your CISO has the most complete picture when weighing options. The second story is a long read and comes from Cyril Francois, Jiayu Chan, Salim Bidam, and Daniel Stepanek over at Elastic Security Labs. It covers their discovery of a new family of previously unknown malware that uses Microsoft Outlook as a communication channel, leveraging the Microsoft Graph API. The Elastic Security team found a malware component that retrieves shellcode from external infrastructure and also a component that acts as an implant, which enables further access to attackers. The shellcode downloader is a tiny Windows executable, only 206 kilobytes in size. It reaches out to domains that are made to resemble well-known vendors, but are misspelled, specifically checkpanit.com, made to resemble checkpoint.com, 40neat.com, made to resemble 40net.com, and vmsphere.com, made to resemble VMware vSphere. The team found both Windows and Linux versions of the implant, which use different methods of proxying data to the command and control server, specifically UDP and TCP listeners, a named pipe client, but also HTTP, reverse UDP, ICMP, TCP binding to a port, reverse TCP, DNS, and Outlook via REST API and via Graph API. The implant also uses an anti-forensics technique and overwrites its files with zeros before deleting them to complicate recovery. The malware also runs Windows PowerShell without actually calling PowerShell.exe by using PowerPick, an offensive security tool. So, who is this article most relevant to? Looking at our 5x5 relevancy matrix, I'm calling it VAFA's relevancy matrix, or VRM for short. We see that this article is primarily relevant to security teams. It is also secondarily relevant to CISOs because the Elastic Security team assessed, given the level of sophistication of the malware components, and the fact that it has not been previously reported on, that the objective behind the campaign was espionage. So, what can a security team do besides looking at the IOCs and running queries through their CM? To start, the article highlights a few interesting techniques besides leveraging the Microsoft Graph API, which you could say is already creative. You can look at these techniques and threat model the attacker in your network. Ask yourself, would your current detection rules and existing log collection be able to detect this attacker, knowing what you know about how it operates? How far along is your network segmentation project? The article talks about how this malware communicates over UDP and TCP, DNS, ICMP, among others. Would your network segmentation detect and block this traffic inside your network? Do you have threshold alerts to show, for example, that the size of DNS requests or responses were typically of certain size, but that starting on this date, they're now larger? Or that there are more of them? Does your current alerting include rules to identify tunneling inside of another protocol? Is your network monitoring technology currently configured to inspect traffic and to detect the contents of malicious DNS packets? If you're the CISO, it is likely that you need to frequently justify why the security budget needs to increase, despite all the investment it has already received. The common line is that security has become a cost center. It doesn't generate revenue. Why must the organization keep increasing its budget? Articles like this one can help illustrate a tangible example of the threats that the investment in security is helping to fight off. Or it can serve to showcase how attackers are innovating, and that the more effectively an organization funds its security program, the better equipped its defenders will be to protect the organization adequately. That's it. That was episode 1. I am Vafa-Dario Izadinia. I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed preparing it. Nest Radio is an initiative that uses AI-generated voice to share cybersecurity stories and discussions in spoken form with listeners in different languages. If you have suggestions for stories you would like to see covered or questions to explore further, drop me a note at nestradio.net. If you like this content, tell your friends. And remember, stay curious,